So then government regulates businesses, obviously, as we move along and talk about this a little bit more. And that came about with the creation of the EPA in 1970. So really about the same time. It wasn't something that came later. And it regulates pollution, of course, air, water. Talk about those endangered species, which in Montana we get a lot of discussion about. There's talk about grizzly bears right now being moved off the list, and some others that have been successfully moved. And we're always talking about the sage grouse too, and about whether or not they will be listed as endangered. Regulates pesticides and, of course, solid waste and toxic and hazardous substances. We don't talk too much about those here as we go through this. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, it was a huge deal. When price of oil was $4, people wanted to drill up there, use the pipeline, the Alaskan pipeline, which is now running at only less than half capacity anyhow, because the wells up there are starting to peter out a little bit. And now this is kind of almost a moot point, since we've discovered the horizontal drilling and whatnot that we're doing down here, shale oil. People don't even talk about the National Arctic Wildlife Refuge anymore. So, air pollution. Clean Air Act and amendments, air quality standards. We talk about primary and secondary, so the area right around the smokestack and whatnot, but then also as it flows to areas that would surround it. Air pollution sources, of course, can be stationary, plants, manufacturing, those types of things. Mobile, on the other hand, would be our vehicles primarily. Okay. And there are compliance waivers and variances, and that's been through a lot of regulations. I think we talk about that as we we'll talk about the bubble concept and emissions banking and whatnot, and how some of those may come into place. So again, in 2009, the EPA declared CO2 to be a pollutant and subject to regulation. That was 2009, so that's been quite a while ago now. We're in 2017. That would have been right when President Obama was taking office. And he was pretty adamant in trying to push some of that regulation, but we're seeing a pretty big pullback from that now with the current administration. There weren't a lot of laws in Congress that were passed to really push the regulation of CO2. So it's more administrative actions, and administrative actions are, one president can do one thing, and the next president obviously then can do the next, or something different. That's what I mean. Air quality index, it's interesting. We don't see these too often in Montana. You used to get these more in Missoula. Missoula used to have a pretty bad air quality problem, as did, I think, East Helena, if I'm not mistaken, and they would have these warnings pretty often, but a lot of the manufacturing plants, or in their cases it was wood products manufacturing or processing, those types of plants, plus people burning wood in their wood stoves, etc., led to some unhealthy conditions. I would tell you, when I went to China, it was about down here, very unhealthy or hazardous, probably every place we went. And even shortly after a rainfall, it would only be clear for a few minutes, and then it would start to get smogged up again. So the point source of the bubble concept says that, they would look at, it's a pretty good picture, they'd take a look, and really what they're saying is that if this smokestack or whatever was running that went down, the company would probably, in all likelihood, be able to build another one without a lot of problems, so long as it didn't put out any more pollution than the one in existence, right? And so it's just a method to try and make some of that permitting and whatnot a little bit easier and a little bit quicker. Emissions reduction banking, kind of same thing. If you were to shut down a particular smokestack, a particular particular area and whatnot, you can kind of bank those emission rights, and thus, again, if you went to build another processor or whatever it might be that was going to put out some more pollution, you would be able to do that with a lot less oversight than what you might have to encounter if you did a brand new one. Trend also is prevention of significant deterioration, right? And they're even starting to look more and more at protections for relatively clean areas. You know, our areas in Montana and whatnot, they're taking a look at particulates, smoke from fires, dust, those types of things. We're getting there. You know, we're getting the electric cars. Most major car manufacturers, and including Tesla, of course, are announced that they're working on all electric cars, and some states are saying that I think some nation states even have said within the next 10 years or so they're going to ban the sale of internal combustion. I don't see that happening in Montana, but of course if they ban them in a lot of other states, then it may become prohibitively expensive to have internal combustion engines in our states. So water pollution. This one had, in fact, I think the state of Montana, along with North Dakota and several other states, sued the Obama administration over some of the executive actions that they were pursuing here. And it all had to do with this definition of navigable waterways. And they really wanted to expand the definition basically to include anything that flowed into a navigable waterway or would affect a navigable waterway in any sense. And it really broadened it to, just about any mud puddle or anything could be regulated in that case. And so there was several states, I don't think just Montana and North Dakota, but several states that had sued. I honestly, it kind of got put on the back burner or something. I haven't heard much more of it. And I'm kind of wondering if, the current administration is maybe taking a little different approach, and so maybe the lawsuit has become a little less important, or maybe they're not even pursuing it at this point in time because of the change in administration. So some goals, no discharge from point source, from, right where it's at without a permit. So even cities, Havre, it treats water and then it puts it back into the Milk River. But that water has to be as clean as when they took it out, if not cleaner. Okay, not yet reached, and this is again part of what the Obama definition or his administration's definition, or under that agency's definition. They kind of wanted to include a lot of the agriculture, and at this point in time, it's not as regulated or not regulated at all in terms of water pollution. Okay, there are other regulations and whatnot, obviously on pesticides, et cetera, and those that might be right beside a river or a navigable waterway, probably regulated, but at this point in time, in terms of water pollution, it's not a lot of regulation. So they do require, in terms of factories and those types of things, to install either the first best practicable technology or the second best available technology. Kind of an interesting way to look at it, I guess. Endangered species, again, something that we end up discussing quite a bit here in Montana. We get a lot of species, but species disappear because oftentimes natural causations. In other words, species were coming and going, like dinosaurs, for example, long before man ever came into being. But human effects, can't be denied, have some impact on some of these species disappearing. Some of the considerations, destruction of habitat, critical habitat, and again, when we talk about the sage grouse, that's a big one. We've plowed up lots of acres that was good habitat for sage grouse. Grazing land, or what we might call grazing land, that had a lot of sagebrush on it. A lot of that's been plowed under, and some of the other stuff is in prime areas for oil gas development, those types of things. And so there's a push to try to limit that so that sage grouse anyhow will have good habitat. Disease and predation, of course, have problems. Of course, we got chronic wasting disease possibly coming into Montana now. So be a lot of movements, mostly by our own fish wildlife, that'll kind of work on that. And commercial and recreational activities. Yeah, and this gets to be pretty contentious with the lakes that we've had. That a lot of people say, and say rightfully, that it has interrupted the normal flow and spawning and that things of some of the fish, and it's created some problems. And of course, any other natural and man-made factors. Pesticide control, definitely some of that, and these laws I don't think we get into a ton. Most of the types of businesses that we would talk about probably don't deal a lot with pesticide control. Although if you had a golf course, for example, your greenskeeper's probably going to have to be licensed, right? A licensed pesticide applicator, because you're going to be doing it on a commercial basis. And if you were doing it for people's lawns and whatnot, you'd have to be a licensed applicator. So you follow the rules and whatnot that they have. So some pesticides obviously are dangerous to wildlife and humans. DDT is one that was banned a long time ago. It's a very effective pesticide, but found that it was causing harm to the birds and whatnot that fed on the carcasses of the critters that died, or fed on the carcasses of the critters that ate the insects and whatnot that had died. Anyhow, yeah, it was kind of a roundabout thing, but definitely had some concerns, and so they can outright ban some of these chemicals, right? And others they can regulate how they're applied, when they're applied, those types of things. Pesticides have to be registered, properly labeled, meet claims of effectiveness, no adverse effects, and those are things, again, if you could do a lot at your own home in terms of applying those types of things, but if you're going to do it commercially, you have to have more certifications, training, etc. Clean Air Act, I don't know why that's on here. We already talked about that a little bit, but the Noise Control Act, 1972, again, had to do a lot with airports and whatnot, and how much noise the planes make when they take off and land, and trying to minimize that and its impact on the houses around those airports. Solid waste disposal was one of the early ones, right? Which does promote research and technical and financial assistance for those areas that are setting up solid waste, landfills, I guess we would call them in these parts. In some areas are running low on land for landfills, and in areas like Montana, we probably figure we got plenty of room yet, given the number of people that we have. So, typical landfill volume, believe it or not, still paper. Look at that, still much paper. That just astounds me that with computers and whatnot, and we keep saying we're getting closer and closer to a paperless society. There's still all kinds of paper. Well, let's stop here and we'll come back and finish up on that.